You know what's fascinating about love and connection? It's that the very person who gives the most is also the one who, when they finally stop giving, creates the biggest void in someone's life. That's what happens with the super empath. They give deeply, they love fully, they see the other person's wounds, they tolerate distance, they try to bridge the gap, they show patience when others would have walked away. But here's the truth: there comes a moment when even the most giving person flips a switch. Not because they stop caring, but because they finally see that caring alone is not enough. When a super empath turns cold, it's not cruelty, it's clarity. They stop chasing, stop begging for crumbs, stop waiting for someone who's too avoidant, too afraid, too unwilling to meet them halfway. And that coldness, that silence, that absence of energy, it's louder than any words they could ever speak. Suddenly, the avoidant feels what the empath has felt all along: emptiness, distance, disconnection. But here's the painful twist: once the super empath turns cold, it's rarely reversible, because the very thing that made them extraordinary, their patience, their hope, their giving heart, also makes them wise enough to know when it's time to walk away forever. And that's the regret the avoidant carries. Not just losing a partner, but losing the one person who could have loved them beyond their walls. The super empath gives deeply in a way that is almost difficult for others to understand. Their love isn't casual, it isn't halfway, and it isn't convenient. It comes from a place of profound awareness and sensitivity, where they can feel not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of the person they care about. They have this unique ability to sense when someone is in pain, even if that person hides it well, and their instinct is to lean in closer, to soothe, to support, and to give without expecting an immediate return. For the super empath, love is not transactional. It's not about keeping score. It's about pouring out from a place of abundance, a deep well of compassion and understanding. When they're in a relationship with someone avoidant, this depth of giving becomes even more apparent. The avoidant partner often pulls away, resists closeness, or creates distance in moments where intimacy is needed most. And yet, the super empath doesn't punish them for it at first. They see the wounds that created that behavior. They know that avoidance often comes from fear of being hurt, fear of losing independence, fear of being vulnerable. And so, rather than turning cold or walking away immediately, the empath softens. They extend more patience, more gentleness, more effort. They reassure, they comfort, they create a safe space where the avoidant could, if they chose to, finally relax and trust. This giving isn't weak. It's one of the strongest things a human being can do. To meet resistance with understanding instead of defensiveness requires courage. To love someone in their most unlovable moments takes a resilience that many people don't have. The super empath holds the relationship together in these fragile times, often without acknowledgement, because their nature is to nurture, not to boast about how much they've done. They give without making it obvious that they're giving, because for them, it's not a strategy, it's simply who they are. But the depth of their giving has another layer. It's not just about offering love in easy moments, it's about the way they remain steady in the storms. When an avoidant withdraws or becomes emotionally distant, most people would interpret that as rejection and either lash out or leave. The super empath interprets it differently. They see it as an unspoken cry for space, for safety, for someone who won't push too hard but also won't abandon. And so they adapt. They manage their own hurt while still keeping the door open for connection. They become an anchor, holding steady so the avoidant can drift without fear of being completely lost. This depth of giving often goes unnoticed by the avoidant at the time. To them, it may feel like things are simply working, or that their distance isn't having much of an impact. They don't always see the quiet strength it takes for the empath to stay present, to keep offering love without resentment. And yet, this is the hallmark of the super empath. They give so deeply, so consistently, that the relationship feels safe even when it shouldn't. They create an emotional home for someone who has never truly felt at home in love. When a super empath finally turns cold, it is one of the most misunderstood moments in a relationship. To the outside world, it might look like they've suddenly become distant or unfeeling, but in reality, their coldness is not about cruelty, it's about clarity. For so long, the empath has been the giver, the one who leans in, the one who makes excuses for the avoidance distance, the one who tries again when their efforts are met with walls. They extend patience far beyond what most people would consider reasonable, because they truly believe in the power of love to heal. But there comes a point when they recognize that continuing to pour out this love isn't an act of kindness anymore, it's self-betrayal. That recognition changes everything. Coldness is not their natural state. Empaths thrive on connection, warmth, and the exchange of emotion. For them to pull back, to shut down the warmth they so effortlessly give, it means they have reached a breaking point. They see clearly that no amount of their giving will transform someone who is unwilling to meet them halfway. This is where their coldness emerges, not as punishment, but as a quiet declaration that they value themselves enough to stop bleeding for someone else's comfort. For the avoidant, this coldness can feel shocking. They're used to the empath always being available, always forgiving, always offering another chance. But the empath's clarity strips the illusion away. The coldness communicates a message that words alone could never deliver. I will no longer abandon myself to hold on to you. It is not said with bitterness, but with a calm certainty that is impossible to argue with. And ironically, it is in this coldness that the avoidant often realizes just how much the empath has been giving all along. The empath's clarity also protects them from slipping back into the cycle. Once they see the truth, they can't unsee it. They recognize that their love has been carrying the relationship on its back, and while they have the capacity to continue doing so, they no longer have the willingness. Their coldness becomes a boundary, one that doesn't need to be shouted or defended, because it's enforced through action. They don't chase, they don't beg, they don't explain endlessly. They simply stop, and in that stopping, there is immense power. The avoidant, who once felt in control by withholding affection, suddenly finds the roles reversed. The super empath is no longer playing the game of pursuit and retreat. The coldness makes it clear that the empath has reclaimed their energy, their self-worth, and their time. What once felt like endless patience has transformed into a quiet, impenetrable wall. Not a wall of anger, but a wall of peace. A wall that says, I see what this is, and I will not lose myself in it anymore. When the super empath withdraws and allows silence to take the place of their giving, it becomes one of the loudest statements they can make. For so long, their presence has been the glue in the relationship, the texts that check in, the gentle reminders of love, the attempts to bridge gaps when things feel distant. Their energy fills the empty spaces created by the avoidance retreat. And because they've always been there, always available, always willing to reach out first, the avoidant grows accustomed to the rhythm of their giving. Silence from the empath is not just the absence of words, it is the removal of an entire lifeline. This silence is powerful because it highlights the contrast. When someone is used to constant warmth, its sudden absence feels like a shock to the system. The avoidant, who once found comfort in the empath's consistency, suddenly feels the void they never expected. They may not have realized how much they depended on the empath's love until it's no longer there. The empath's withdrawal becomes a mirror, showing the avoidant the emptiness that has been present all along, but masked by the empath's efforts. It is not a loud argument or a dramatic exit. It's a quiet retreat that echoes louder than any fight ever could. The empath doesn't need to explain the silence because the message is embedded within it. By no longer chasing, no longer filling the space with reassurance, they allow the avoidant to experience the weight of their own distance. What once felt like control to the avoidant, the ability to push away without consequence, suddenly feels like loss. And it's a loss that cuts deeper because it's not accompanied by anger or pleas. Anger could be dismissed and pleas could be resisted, but silence cannot be ignored. Silence lingers. It forces the avoidant to sit with the reality of what they've created. The silent withdrawal also changes the dynamic of power. For so long, the avoidant may have felt they held the upper hand, dictating the level of closeness, pulling away whenever things felt too vulnerable. But when the empath goes quiet, the control shifts. The avoidant is no longer being pursued. They're no longer dictating the pace. Instead, they are left to confront the emptiness they once thought they wanted. And for many, that emptiness becomes unbearable. What makes this silence so devastating is the fact that it's final in tone. Even if no words are spoken, it doesn't invite negotiation, it doesn't seek understanding, it simply stands as a boundary, a line that says, I will no longer give where I am not received. It is the kind of silence that carries with it the weight of every unappreciated effort, every overlooked kindness, every ignored attempt at closeness. And while the empath may not raise their voice, their absence becomes deafening. When the super empath finally withdraws and allows the silence to settle, it is then that the avoidant begins to feel the very void they themselves created. For so long, the avoidant has operated from a place of control, convinced that distance would protect them, that keeping intimacy at arm's length would ensure safety. They believed that if they withheld just enough, they could avoid the risk of rejection, the pain of vulnerability, the fear of being consumed. And while the empath was pouring love into the relationship, filling the spaces left by that avoidance, the avoidant rarely felt the full weight of their own detachment. But once the empath steps back, once the constant warmth is no longer cushioning the emptiness, the avoidant comes face to face with the reality of their own isolation. The void is not simply the absence of the empath's presence. It is the sudden awareness of just how much they relied on it without realizing. The avoidant begins to feel the silence in small but piercing ways, the phone that doesn't buzz, the comfort that doesn't come, the reassurance that isn't offered. All the little moments where the empath once bridged the gap are now hollow. What once felt normal, the pulling away, the guarding of emotions, now feels unbearable because there is no longer someone counterbalancing it with love and effort. This shift is especially painful because the avoidant often doesn't recognize the empath's role until it's gone. They may have mistaken the empath's patience for something guaranteed, assuming that no matter how much they pulled back, the empath would always be there to lean in. But the absence exposes the truth. The connection they thought was stable was actually being held together almost entirely by the empath's willingness to give. And when that willingness is gone, the relationship collapses under the weight of their neglect. For the avoidant, the void feels like a haunting. It reminds them of the very thing they feared most, abandonment. The irony is cruel. In trying so hard to protect themselves from the possibility of being left, they created the exact conditions that made it inevitable. The emptiness that follows is not temporary discomfort. It's a deep recognition that something irreplaceable has slipped through their fingers. They begin to see the empath not as the overly giving partner they once underestimated, but as the anchor they desperately needed and didn't appreciate. And this realization is not just about missing someone's presence. It's about recognizing the cost of their own walls. The avoidant feels, often for the first time, what it's like to truly be without the one person who had the patience to love them despite their fears. The void becomes a mirror, showing them not only the absence of the empath, but also the emptiness within themselves that they tried so hard to hide. It is in this moment that regret begins to take root, because they finally understand that what they pushed away was the very thing they needed most. Regret for the avoidant is not a fleeting feeling. It becomes a lasting imprint that lingers long after the super empath has walked away. Once the empath reaches the point of true coldness, they rarely return. Unlike others who might come back and forth in cycles, the empath's decision is final, even if it doesn't look dramatic on the surface. It's a quiet but irreversible shift. They don't leave with slammed doors or fiery words. They leave with composure, with dignity, with a calm that says everything is already decided. For the avoidant, this permanence is devastating because they suddenly realize there is no second chance waiting around the corner. The source of love they once took for granted is gone, and no amount of belated recognition can bring it back. The regret is especially sharp because the avoidant often begins to understand, in hindsight, the extraordinary depth of what they had. They recall the small acts of kindness, the moments of patience, the countless times the empath stayed when anyone else would have left. They see clearly the loyalty, the forgiveness, the love that never demanded perfection, but simply asked for presence. And now that it's over, those memories transform from comforts into reminders of what they squandered. Each recollection cuts deeper because it carries the awareness that such love is rare, perhaps even once in a lifetime, and they let it slip through their hands. What makes the regret eternal is that the avoidant knows the door is closed not out of spite but out of necessity. The empath didn't walk away because they stopped caring. They walked away because caring was no longer sustainable. That difference is what haunts the avoidant. If the empath had left in anger, they might hold out hope for reconciliation. If the empath had left in a fit of passion, they might believe time could soften the edges. But when someone leaves with peace, it signals a depth of finality that can't be undone. It says, I loved you, I tried, but I will not betray myself anymore. That kind of clarity doesn't waver, and the avoidant knows it. The permanence of this regret also comes from comparison. After the empath is gone, the avoidant may seek connection elsewhere, but nothing feels the same. Other partners may not offer the same patience, the same understanding, the same willingness to hold space for their fears. What once felt suffocating, the empath's deep giving, now feels like the very thing they crave but can't find again. They realize too late that the qualities they once resisted were exactly the qualities they needed most. And because they recognize that no one else may offer love in that way, the regret deepens into something more permanent than loss. It becomes a shadow they carry forward. For the avoidant, this is the cruel paradox. By trying to avoid the risk of pain, they created the greatest pain of all. And while the super empath moves forward with clarity and peace, the avoidant is left with the weight of knowing that the love they pushed away is the love they will never forget and never replace. And so the journey of the super empath teaches us something profound. Love, in its purest form, is a gift, but it is not infinite when it's one-sided. The very person who gave endlessly, who held the relationship together with their patience and warmth, eventually becomes the one who teaches the deepest lesson that love without reciprocity cannot survive. When their coldness sets in, it is not bitterness, it is truth. It is the reclaiming of self-worth. For the avoidant, that moment becomes a lifetime of reflection, because the loss of a super empath is not just the loss of a partner, it is the loss of the rarest kind of love. A love that saw their wounds and still embraced them. A love that believed in them even when they doubted themselves. And it is that kind of loss that doesn't fade. It echoes, it lingers, it reshapes the way they see every connection afterward. To the empaths, listening your love is your power and your boundaries are your protection. Never fear the moment you must turn cold, because in that choice, you honor yourself. And to those who recognize themselves in the avoidant, understand that pulling away from love is not protection, it's self-sabotage. When someone extraordinary gives you their heart, meet them there. Don't wait until their silence teaches you what their love once offered. Thank you for giving me your time, your attention, and your presence today. I hope these words serve as both a reminder and a mirror, reminding you of the value of your love and reflecting the truth that connection thrives only when it's met with courage on both sides. Take this with you. The coldness of the super empath is not the end of love. It's the beginning of a new standard. Honor it, live by it, and never forget its lesson. Thank you and goodbye.